This week, we are reviewing Chapter 9, taking a look at women in work. I've titled this lecture, The Value of Women's Labor. Our editors have designed this chapter, which is a really important chapter, to take a look at the work that women do, both unpaid and paid. And the reason this unit is so significant is because obviously women work. Women have always worked. This we know. Our mothers know, our aunts know, our sisters know, our grandmothers know. Women all over the world and all throughout history know women have always worked. Excuse me. The big challenge, however, is how has women's labor been valued? And how does a society really understand the value of women's labor? And if a society does not truly value that labor, right, then how does that society also estimate the true worth of women within that society? And so this has a rippling effect, right? If a woman's value is not, if her labor is not valued, right? It's also easy to dismiss her as a political subject. It's also easy to dismiss her right to an education, right? You can see the ripples, right, all throughout history. So this is why we're going to pay so much attention this week to these themes. So let's start with what is very near and dear to all of us. Let's start at home. Taking a look at the work that women do at home. So right away, as we open the chapter, our editors point out that women are the primary breadwinners for 40% of families with children in the home. So that is probably not too surprising today. After all, this is the 21st century. We're now in 2021. And just due to economic realities here in the United States, most families do, in fact, need to have a dual family income. Most of us probably grew up having both our parents working. Okay. Second bullet point, women's work inside the home is devalued because it is not seen as real work in the eyes of society. So even though women are the primary breadwinners, right, for 40% of the families, that is almost half of the families, right? They're working outside of the home, right? They're still doing that double shift, coming home and taking primary responsibility for all the domestic care. Okay? But that is undervalued here, and it's not seen, excuse me, as real work. Now you may argue, and fair enough, hey, it is the 21st century, and I know a lot of men who are making a more conscious effort to help and take more responsibility around the house. And that is good. Studies have shown that more men are taking more responsibility. But when we look at the actual statistics, we see that in 2018, the Bureau of Labor found that women are still doing more when it comes to domestic responsibilities. Women perform 14 hours per week of domestic work, while men on average worked less than 5 hours of domestic work. And that domestic work is going to be very gendered, very gendered. Okay. So 14 hours compared to 5 hours. Okay. That's almost 3 times the amount of work. All right. So what does this mean overall for women who are taking on all of the domestic responsibilities? Interestingly, if she is also employed, it's going to have larger ramifications in her outside employment. Okay? Because women participate in at least 2/3 of all domestic work. Okay? And this leads to reduced economic resources from employment, more horizontal career ladder moves, right? So if she does change careers, it's going to be on a horizontal level, not moving up, and lower Social Security benefits. Now, that might sound a bit abstract, so let me give you some concrete examples. If women are taking primary responsibilities for domestic responsibilities, okay, even if she is married, has a husband, okay, they have several kids together. Who gets sick? The children, right? Children get sick. Who is most likely to stay home with the kids? Is it going to be the husband who's going to stay home with those children? Or is it going to be the woman who stays home with the children? Who's going to take that sick day? Well, most likely it's going to be the mom. And that's going to happen because she probably has a job that doesn't pay as much as the husband. And that's due to the wage gap, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay. So she's expected to make that sacrifice. She's going to stay home. Okay. Kid gets sick or hurt, or there's an incident at school. Parents get called in the middle of the day, go pick up the kid. Who's going to deal with that? It's the mom. Right now, this entire past year, COVID-19, who has been dealing with the majority of homeschooling for children during COVID-19? Is it the fathers who have had to deal with homeschooling their children? No, not at all. It's the mothers who are trying to work and trying to homeschool 3 different children on one computer, right? They're the ones who are having to do it. Okay. I can give you numerous examples, right? Her mother gets sick. Her mother-in-law gets sick. Who's expected to take care of her husband's mom? Do you think the husband is going to do that? He might. Yeah, it would really be wonderful if he does that. But our society kind of expects that it's going to be the woman who goes and takes care of that, sets up the nursing home, etc. Or maybe not set up the nursing home. No, you're supposed to bring that woman into the house, aren't you? Because that's what society expects. You might see lower Social Security benefits here, and you might be wondering, well, how does all of this affect Social Security benefits? Every year, a woman is out of the workplace, okay, she loses an estimated $10,000, okay, in overall economic benefits packages. Okay? That would have gone into retirement funds. That's Social Security. Okay. So let's say you're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, and you've decided to have a family, which most people would like to do that. Not everyone, but a lot of people want to have children in their 20s and their 30s. But that's also the prime years for starting your career. Okay? You decide to stay home for maybe 1 to 3 years. If you are so fortunate, you're going to step out of the workplace for that time period to be with your child during those early years. Okay, that's really great if you and your partner can afford to do that economically. However, when you attempt to get back into the workplace, okay, you are not going to be able to enter the workplace at the exact level financially that you started out at, or I should say where you left at. Okay, maybe you left a job and you're getting 36,000 a year. Okay, you're not going to be able to enter back in at 36,000 a year. Okay, you will be taking a pay cut, and you will have lost, right, 3 years worth of those economic benefits that you would have been building up. Boom, boom, boom. But men who didn't take those years out to raise the children, right? No, they're just climbing and climbing up higher and higher, and each year making more and more and more and more. All right. So when we think about women's unpaid labor, which, by the way, none of us can really live without. Okay. Um, we do have to think about it. What keeps us going? What keeps us going? As we were growing up, our parents asked us to help out around the house. Hopefully, you did help out around the house. Okay? And hopefully, your brothers as well as your sisters helped out too. Because it is hard, right? Laundry does have to get cleaned, dishes have to get cleaned, meals have to get made, okay? Sheets have to get washed, people have to get bathed, food has to get cooked, okay? All of this kind of work, okay, is often termed, kind of jumping to the second point here, reproductive labor. And it includes care and the domestic related activities, such as unpaid housework. And it's the emotional care of family members and the raising of children. But if that did not happen, how would society keep going? How would society keep going? But because women are the majority of those performing this labor, it is undervalued. It is undervalued. Right? I mean, imagine what would happen if every single mother walked out and went on strike. Think about it. What if collectively every woman said, basta, enough, I'm going on strike. And the whole neighborhood, every woman went out and said, no more, not until there's a guaranteed family income. And we all get paid minimum for the work that we do. The world would go crazy, wouldn't it? It'd be pretty kind of amazing if to think about it. Okay. Our editors also make the point, the top point on this slide here, that the way we talk about gender and the domestic realm. So discourses about gender that associate women and the home and domesticity, they reinforce each other. And there's this assumption that housework and childcare are naturally women's work. Right? Everybody just assumes that all young girls and all women want to have children. We all want to be wives. We all want to take care of the house, as if somehow it is rooted in our biology. Remember what Simone de Beauvoir said, right? She argued against that. Our biology is not our destiny. We have to keep that in mind. For those of us who want to be moms, who want to be parents, who love taking care of the home, go for it. Nothing wrong with it. Absolutely enjoy it. I'm a parent, love my son, even when he's pushing back and giving me all the gruff, and you bet he does. He's 20, he's at that age, okay? Wouldn't change it for the world, but it was my choice. My choice. And that is what is key, okay? So let's shift a little bit. Let's take a look at how did women historically get left out of a material appreciation, an economic appreciation for the work that they have done. Okay? And where this comes about, I'm going to pause for just 1 second. I'm going to come right back. Where this shift starts to occur in United States history is in the early part of the 19th century, in a time period known as the Market Revolution. And during this time, we see the transition from a largely agrarian society. It's the early beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. And this was the very first time that women entered the paid labor force. Okay? This is the 1820s. Now, the factories we have are all along the East Coast, and they're largely mills, big mills that are weaving textiles. Interestingly, because they're textile mills, right, cloth, it is seen as something that is domestic, right, feminine, something of the an extension of the domestic realm. So, given the gender roles of this time period, nobody would expect to pay a woman what you would pay a man, right? Because first off, these women are not going to work their entire lives. They're only going to work until they're married, okay? And again, given the gendered beliefs, you would never pay a young woman what you would pay a man. Something else is occurring at this exact same time economically, okay? We have two other groups of laborers. This is the American North, and we have free blacks who are also working in this time period, and we have immigrants. This time they're coming over from Germany and they're coming over from Ireland. And given the racism of the day and the nativism of the day, right, Northerners are going to argue, hey, I'm not going to pay a free black man, and I'm not going to pay an Irish Catholic the same kind of money that I would pay a native-born Protestant white man. So these laborers, right, women, free blacks, and immigrants, right, they all become seen as cheap labor right? Known as cheap labor pools. So in a very similar way, what will happen in the 1820s, we still see today. If you look around the labor market and the wage gap and the wage disparities, today's cheap labor pools consist of these groups as well, right? Women, cheap labor pool, people of color, cheap labor pool, and immigrants, right? Any recent immigrants. Employers are always going to go for the cheapest labor they can find. And that's because these groups of people are not valued and their labor is not valued. Just to very quickly clarify some labor terms. So in this time period, and labor historians, and yes, you can major in labor history, like I majored in women's history. You could religious history, economic history, business history. There are labor historians. And what we see happening at this time period, fascinatingly, is we'll see the transition to different ways that one's labor really becomes valued. So some people will, like free white men, they will earn a family wage. Okay. Well, here in the 21st century, that's more like being a salaried laborer. Okay. In the 19th century, if you got a family wage, that meant you would get paid a set wage. And every couple of weeks, right, month, it was a good wage. And it was assumed you were the head of the family as the man, and it was enough money to provide for you and your family. Okay. And these women who started entering the mills, working in the looms here in Lowell, okay, they were being paid uh, on the hour, right? Very, very cheap, cheap. And there are other ways you can pay workers as well, but an hourly wage there at Lowell. So let's fast forward, move us closer in time. Okay. After the Civil War, there are some new opportunities that open up for women. Right? The Industrial Revolution, technically historians talk about the second Industrial Revolution after the Civil War. Some new jobs open up. The typewriter had just been invented. And interestingly, you can see the keyboards of the typewriter when they first came out. They were really, really small. And it was argued that the keyboard was a perfect fit for small, delicate, feminine hands. And all of a sudden, in the very last 2 decades of the 19th century, there's a whole new profession that will open up for women, and that will be typists entering into secretarial pools. Never before in history had women entered or walked into a business office as an employee. The world of business was men's. This is just a picture of a beautiful 19th century department store, right? It's an illustration of Marshall Fields in Chicago, right? Because the first beautiful, really beautiful department stores were built in the Gilded Age. And in that time period, the wealthy patrons, the wives of the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, okay, they wanted to buy their very nice furs, right? Their jewels. They did not want to buy them from men who would be selling it. They wanted to buy it from women. Okay. So the new professions that opened up for women, right, at the very end of the 19th century, early 20th century, were secretary, sales, teaching as well, and nursing. Secretary, sales, teaching, and nursing. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you look around today, you will find, as it is noted on page 474 in our chapter, women still dominate these professions. Secretary, sales, teaching, and nursing, while those were wonderful opportunities for women at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, why is it that 100 years later, women are still dominating these fields? What is happening? Why haven't women been able to move out of these fields? Well, there's a very specific reason why. It is known as the feminization of labor. And when this happens, it is not a good thing. We do not say, yay, something got feminized. No. It's a very specific sociological term. This refers to the fact that when women start to become the dominant member of a profession, the actual value, the economic worth and compensation for that profession decline, will drop dramatically. So when women, right, start to cluster in a particular sector, men flee. They leave that field. Okay. Employers will start hiring women, right? And because they can pay them significantly cheaper than men. That's why the compensation goes down, 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 down. And that's why the field, right, economically drops. So that's why when the feminization of labor occurs and women dominate a particular profession, these jobs can also be known as pink collar jobs, because they're dominated by women, also known as pink collar jobs. Bringing us closer yet to present day. So when is there a highlight for women in history in terms of work? Well, most of you have heard of Rosie the Riveter, that very, very famous icon of World War II. During World War II, suddenly female workers were in demand. Now, it would only be temporary. When we joined the war, the United States didn't join the war until the very end of 1941. But when we did, right, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor is bombed. We join the war December 8th. Okay. 14 million women were already working in the United States. The key here is they were working in traditional jobs. Okay. But the Rosie the Riveter campaign was a very successful government propaganda campaign that was designed to appeal to all American women, encouraging them to fulfill their patriotic duties and come and work in the defense industries. And so we see that between 1941 and 1945, we get an additional 6 million women They are not secretaries. They are not teachers. They are not sales clerk, right? What's really fascinating is that they are working in non-traditional fields. And there were, in fact, many Rosies here in Cleveland. The IX Center, right? What we know now as the IX Center, was a huge defense factory. Many of the automobiles and the steel plants all around here in greater Cleveland, right? We were a huge defense um, producing region. So I encourage all of you, talk to your great grandmothers, your great aunts. I have students who often find out that they do indeed have some family relatives who were Rosies during the war. So during these spring holidays, talk to your family members and find out if they worked and served doing their patriotic duty. So, well, after the war, the Rosies were sent home. They were not allowed to keep their jobs. Right? The nation needed to open up work for the returning veterans. So when does the federal government help us as women? That's not going to be until 1963. Under the Kennedy administration, President Kennedy gets through Congress the 1963 Equal Pay Act. Now, this act has the best of intentions. Right? The act is designed to end the wage gap between men and women. In fact, it states, quote, men and women working in the exact same job must receive equal pay. Well, it sounds perfect, doesn't it? Right? Men and women working in the exact same job must receive equal pay. Well, that's it. It's solved, right? We should not have any problems today, according to this congressional law. It didn't turn out that way, did it? No. Because you see, there are loopholes. There are a lot of loopholes. I've put them here on the slide, and I just want to illustrate to students. If you ever wonder why I'm so persnickety about language, okay? Language matters. Let's take a look at the problems with this act. Well, one just happens to be time, okay? It's 1963. There are very few women in equal status jobs with men. In 1963, the Civil Rights Act has not been passed. So you're not going to find a whole lot of women who are lawyers. There are some, sure, but there's not that many. No, because women are barred from the best schools in the country. Same thing with doctors. Yeah, there are some women doctors, but they've been barred from a lot of them. Easily evaded by corporations. Well, all a company has to do, if they want to avoid this, is take someone's job description. Say you are a regional manager, okay? All they have to do in your job description, which might say file monthly audits, file monthly timesheets, review the region, and then if you're the women, they might say and make extra copies for the board members. But the man isn't going to say and make extra copies of the board members. That's it. Add 2 or 3 words, you no longer have the same job description. They get out of it. And then this last point here, probably one of the most important ways to get around the Equal Pay Act. If you work for a private business, which many of you probably will, right? You either work for a private business or you work for a public business. Okay? Private businesses have every right to ask you to sign before they will hire you a confidentiality waiver, which states that you will not disclose how much money you make. You waive that right. Right? You will never tell anyone how much money you make. And if you do, that is grounds for dismissal, immediate termination, if you tell anyone how much money you make. Right. So, that's why that act didn't get us as far as anybody hoped. But the next year, the 1964 Civil Rights Act did make a huge difference. Now, many students are already familiar with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. You are usually familiar with this act because you've heard that it's a landmark piece of civil rights legislation, and that is absolutely true. This was the piece of legislation that once and for all ended legal segregation in this country. Outright segregation is ended, and discrimination. And there are lots of parts to the act. What we're going to focus on right now, since this is our chapter on work, is a clause called Title VII. And this deals specifically with employment. And again, most of you are probably familiar with this clause. You've heard it. It is unlawful to discriminate against anyone in terms of hiring on the basis of race, color, sex, religion, or national origin. Now, that was the original clause back in 1964, right? On the basis of race, color, sex, religion, or national origin. You cannot discriminate in terms of employment. Okay? So with the addition of sex, that made it very important when that got put in there, because that meant that women are also a protected class in terms of employment. Many of you wrote earlier this semester how shocked you were while reading the Richardson and Baumgardner essay on A Day Without Feminism. When, before the 1970s, you could go through the help wanted columns, and there would be men on one side and jobs for women on the other side, because it was completely legal to discriminate, right? Oh, I'm not going to hire you because you're a woman. Don't even bother to apply. I'm not going to hire you because you're black. Don't even bother to apply. Oh, you're a Jew. Don't even bother to apply. Okay? Thank all the men and women and everyone who worked to get this passed. The other very important part here is, along with passage of this act, we see the creation of the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. And that's the federal agency that will review cases of discrimination, right? So if there is a big employer who is continuing to discriminate, you can file a claim, right? Okay, and moving along. Affirmative action. So um, there are many misunderstandings about affirmative action and how that works. So let's clarify this. Affirmative action policies encourage employers to take gender and race into account in terms of hiring. It has helped diversify America's workplaces. So what affirmative action does when it comes to employment, it says that employers that receive federal funds, okay, they have to take into serious consideration all applicants who have the same qualifications. So if they are advertising help wanted, right, anyone who applies that meets the qualifications, right, they have to seriously consider that applicant. So if you're applying for a job, you want to be a teacher, and it says you have to have a master's degree in social science, and a teaching certificate, 3 years student teaching. Okay. All right. Everyone with a master's degree in social science, teaching certificate, 3 years in student teaching, they have to look at all of that. They can't just say, oh, last name Soto Schwartz. I don't know. That person could be biracial. That person could be Jewish. I'm not going to look at that. I've met all those qualifications. They have to seriously take a look at my application. And if they don't, then I can question them on that. I can challenge them. And it's not like the old days where they could just say, woman, bye. Um, Now, here's what is really interesting here, this statistic. Because there are so many urban myths about affirmative action, most people aren't aware of this. The class that has benefited the most from affirmative action, right, it's white middle class women who benefited the most. 6 million white women are in higher occupations today than they would have been without affirmative action. And that's because they already had the advantage of education and already being in jobs that they were being held down because no one would have looked at them seriously. But now they're able to move from the middle to the upper echelons. Okay, so the Lilly Ledbetter Act. This was passed right when President Obama came into office. And Obama campaigned on helping to create fair wages for women in the workplace. Okay. So let me give you a definition of this act, and then I'll give you a backstory. So you can see the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was the first law that President Obama signed in when he first came into office. Okay. And what the act did was it was an amendment to that Equal Pay Act of 1963. And what it does is it ends the statute of limitations for filing an equal pay lawsuit regarding pay discrimination. So the Ledbetter Fair Pay Act ends the statute of limitations for filing an equal pay lawsuit. So the backstory here is fascinating. Lily Ledbetter in the early 2000s had she retired. She retired. She had been working down in Atlanta for the Goodyear Tire Company. And she had worked there for 30 years. She was, in fact, a regional manager. And as she was approaching her retirement, someone slipped her a note anonymously and tipped her off. Sure enough, she had been discriminated against in pay. She had never been paid the same as any of the male regional managers in her area. Okay, clearly this is a violation, right, of the Equal Pay Act of 1963, right? She was doing the same work as the men. So she filed a lawsuit, right? And it went several rounds, and it finally worked its way up to the United States Supreme Court. And in 2008, the Supreme Court came out with a ruling. And Lily Ledbetter lost. She lost in the Supreme Court. And this surprised everybody because it was very easy to prove Ledbetter's case. All her attorneys had to do was requisition the pay stubs and her reviews, and requisition the pay stubs and the reviews of her male colleagues. And you could see she had been discriminated against and she was not being paid equally. The Supreme Court basically said, well, we're sorry, Ms. Ledbetter, but according to the Equal Pay Act of 1963, there is a statute of limitations, and you were supposed to file your lawsuit within the first 180 days from when the discrimination first began. Well, she didn't know she was being discriminated against. They never told her. Remember those confidentiality waivers? You're not supposed to talk about how much money you make. So she didn't know. The discrimination went on for 30 years. So she lost out. Oh my God. Yeah, this was actually a big thing in the Obama, in the primaries, because the press, after that ruling came out, the press ran over to John McCain, who at that point he was running against Obama, and they asked John McCain, what do you think about this? And McCain said, oh, well, I just think women need to get more education. And then the press ran over to Obama. Obama, what do you think about the ruling in the Ledbetter case? And Obama said, I am outraged. I can't believe in this day and age that women are still being discriminated against. You bet when I get into office, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure American women get equal pay. Well, fortunately, he did what he could and got the Ledbetter Act. As for Lily Ledbetter, she never got any economic compensation. She never did. But she did go on to say that she is grateful that her granddaughters will never be discriminated against like this. Okay, I'm just about to wrap up. I've got 2 more slides left. Thank you for your patience. I told you this was an important chapter. So, Ledbetter. One of the ways she was really affected by that 30-year discrimination was that she was not able to adequately prepare for her retirement because women have, on average, a big wage gap between women and men. If you go to the formal PowerPoint for this week, not the condensed one that I created for this lecture. There's an embedded link, and it will take you to equitypay.org. At equitypay.org will show you the most current wage gap statistics. But because of the wage gap, what this means, okay, is that men have more leisure spending money, and they are able to take that discretionary money and invest it into retirement savings. So women on average, and Ledbetter is a very good example, women on average lose about $500,000 over a lifetime in investment savings. Over $500,000 in investment savings. And wow, what a toll that takes. Now, this will give you another perspective. So I kind of emphasized the third point here just a minute ago, right? The average 25-year-old woman who works full-time year-round until she retires at the age 65 will earn on average almost $500,000 less than the average man, right? Due to the wage gap, right? It's a lot of money. You could be investing that. And I appreciate how our editors point out that the most disparate wage gap in the United States is between those who had corporations and those who work for corporations. In 2018, the average CEO, right, Chief Executive Officer, right, they took home around $12 million a year. And that was more than 300 times that of the average worker. Lastly, because I want to wrap this up, okay, I don't have time to lecture on sexual harassment, but do make sure you take a look at the pages 465 through 467, 68. Make sure you are aware that because we do not have direct legislation regarding sexual harassment, the Supreme Court uses Title VII of the Civil Rights Act that we just reviewed, okay, as a basis for framing its legal interpretation of sexual harassment law, right? Because you can't discriminate at work based on sex or race, okay, or national origin, etc. So that's how, when these cases have gone to court, it's being based off of Title VII. And there are two legal definitions of sexual harassment: quid pro quo, right, this for that, right? Someone says, hey, if you do this for me, you can get that, or creation of a hostile work environment. So do review those. Okay. Well, thank you for making it through a little longer lecture than usual, but I hope this has helped you get a better understanding of the significance of the need to make sure that women's work is valued. And again, make sure to go to the embedded link, payequity.org, and this week's discussion board link, also going to the Women's Bureau. So you can get a real good contemporary understanding of statistics, looking at women's experiences all across the spectrum. It greatly varies according to class, according to race as well. Because I want all students to be aware that there are some great opportunities for women in work. Not everything is negative, but until we can raise all of us up, right, we have more work to do. Thank you.